Welcome to Northwest Tech Show, the show where we talk about technology and how it affects our lives and how a better understanding of it can maybe make it affect our lives in better ways. We're going to start off the show, as we like to do, with a little bit of Creative Commons content to kick off the themes.
This is Twit.
Okay, so what happened after CoinHive shut down? Aside from that, as we previously discussed, and as I said at the top of the show, the highly controversial CoinHive browser-based Monero coin mining facility voluntarily closed its doors. Actually, it was 2 months ago. I said a month ago. It was on March 8th, so it has been nearly 2 months. At the time, it was expected that the vacuum would quickly be filled with alternative mining solutions. So what has happened? Interestingly, the head of threat intelligence at Malwarebytes, Jerome Segura, decided to answer that question and put up a blog posting at Malwarebytes titled "Cryptojacking in the Post-CoinHive Era." And he wrote, September 2017 is widely recognized as the month in which the phenomenon that became cryptojacking began. The idea that website owners could monetize their traffic by having visitors mine for cryptocurrencies in their browser was not new. But this time around, it became mainstream thanks to an entity known as CoinHive. He wrote, the mining service became a household name. And I was thinking, okay, I'm not sure whose house he's in, but it wasn't a household. I'm not sure that CoinHive was a household name, but within certainly our podcast listener community became a household name, he wrote, overnight, and quickly drew ire for its original API, whose implementation failed to take into account user approval and CPU consumption. As a result, threat actors were quick to abuse it by turning compromised websites and routers into a large illegal mining business. He writes, the ride was wild, but as we came to see, short-lived, as CoinHive shut its doors in March 2019 following months of steady decline and loss of interest in browser-based mining. And I'll interject here, as I said, that as we talked about at the time, it was largely a function of the general collapse in the cryptocurrency valuations from their highs of a few years before that, which did a lot to take the wind out of the market for monetizing the arguably stolen CPU cycles of innocent web users. Remember that the browsers responded and started fighting back, and things like uBlock Origin and that the like. That's interesting. uBlock Origin did not block WebMinePool because I've got it running. It shows a block of something on my browser, but not that. So, as I said at the time, and I say now, with user permission, with a user's knowledge, I think this is an interesting idea for monetizing for some sites that do it responsibly and want to monetize the time that their users spend. We've talked about ad blockers, where we're seeing some pushback against them from time to time. You get a pop-up saying, I see you're using an ad blocker. Would you please consider supporting the site? Well, if using my processor while I'm rummaging around was an option to give revenue to them that they sanctioned, it's like, okay, as long as everybody agrees. So anyway, what the Malwarebytes guy wrote, since what they have is they have a presence in many people's machines, and they are doing real-time traffic analysis in order to protect the machines. He wrote, interestingly, we still detect thousands of attempts for CoinHive-related domain requests, even though the service announced it was shutting down on March 8th. Over the past week, our telemetry recorded an average of 50,000 attempts per day. Digging deeper, we see that a large number of websites and routers have never been cleaned, and the bits of JavaScript requesting the CoinHive library are still there. Evidently, with the service down, the necessary WebSocket that sends and receives data between client and server will fail to connect to the server, resulting in zero mining activity or gain. Yet it's, very much like, code red and NIMDA. You put a sensor out on the net, you still get code red and NIMDA pings because there are still some of those viruses, those worms, still alive trying to reproduce. Similarly, it's going to be a long time before every router that has a resident copy of a CoinHive miner in it gets rebooted and then doesn't get reloaded into RAM, presuming that it wasn't made persistent. So this kind of stuff, these things have a very long tail before they finally go away. And for anyone who's interested, I have a picture from February 27th through the end of April. It's relatively, it's declining from its peak, but it's sort of the decline looks like it's leveled off to like those things that are going to probably be around for a long time. And so he poses the question in his blog, is cryptojacking still a thing? He says, to answer that question, we go back to the early adopters of browser-based mining, which were torrent sites. Visiting a proxy for the Pirate Bay with our browser, we spot something familiar enough. Our system's CPU usage maxes out at 100%. So, he writes, yeah. Apparently, in some corners of the web, crypto mining itself remains alive and well. He says, as we'll recall, this is what started the cryptojacking trend back in 2017, when users weren't told about this code running on their machine, let alone that it was hijacking their processor for maximum usage. In this instance, he writes, the mining API was provided by CryptoLoot, which was one of CoinHive's competitors at the time. Malwarebytes reports that while they are seeing nowhere near the same level of activity as they saw during the fall of 2017 and early 2018, according to their telemetry, they are still blocking more than 1 million requests to CryptoLoot each day. So that says there is still an effort by mining to get its script loaded into people's systems for the purpose of mining. There are a few other services out there, and it's worth mentioning CoinIMP, which he writes that they've seen used more sensibly on file sharing sites. And he says router-based mining still going. While the number of compromised sites loading web miners was going down in 2018, a fresh opportunity presented itself thanks to serious vulnerabilities affecting MikroTik routers worldwide. By injecting mining code from a router and serving it to any connected device behind it. We talked about this in the past, where, for example, if you were behind an infected router and you went to an unencrypted landing page, like your ISP's DNS intercept, where it said, "Oh, we don't, the site you're looking for isn't available. Brought to you by Cox. How about some of these?" That would immediately pin your system CPU, because the router you got that message through took advantage of the fact that the page you received was non-encrypted in order to insert its JavaScript into your page header. So he says, by injecting mining code from a router and serving it to any connected devices behind it, criminals could finally scale the process so it was not limited to visiting a particular website, therefore generating decent revenues. On the other hand, they could only do this for any non-HTTPS page that the browser loaded. Once upon a time, 10 years ago, that would have been very lucrative. Now, not so much, because pretty much everything is encrypted. He says the number of hacked routers running a miner has greatly decreased. However, today, we can still find several hundred that are harboring the old, now inactive CoinHive code, and have also been injecting a newer miner. Okay, so this brings us to webminepool.com, meaning that naturally it is being used for malicious purposes. Webminepool.com is now being injected into people's systems by compromised routers. And so anyway, he concludes with campaigns gone missing. perhaps the biggest change in cryptojacking-related activity is the lack of new attacks and campaigns in the wild targeting vulnerable websites. He says, for example, in the spring of 2018, we saw waves of attacks against Drupal sites where web miners were one of the primary payloads. And in fact, we've addressed the observation that that's changing now previously. He says, these days, hacked sites are leveraged in various traffic monetization schemes that include browser locks, fake updates, and malvertising. If the content management system is Magneto or another e-commerce platform, the primary payload is going to be a web skimmer, of course, and we know that those are trying to obtain the user's credit card information as it's submitted to a monetization to an e-commerce site. He says we might compare cryptojacking to a gold rush that didn't last too long, as criminals sought more rewarding opportunities. However, we wouldn't rush to call it fully extinct. We can certainly expect web miners to stick around, especially for sites that generate a lot of traffic. Indeed, miners can provide an additional revenue stream that is, as concluded in this virus bulletin paper, and they have a link to it that says, quote, dependent on various factors, including, of course, the value of cryptocurrencies, which historically has been volatile. So I think that's where we are. The coin hive died. That was the preeminent crypto mining tool. Everybody was using it. There were also RANs. They now have a larger share. And then there's this web mine pool, which you guys in your network, Leo, you're probably glad, are unable to access thanks to your protection. It's alive and well. So I think just like all of the worms that have existed in the past, the malware that's out there, there's like a place for and a diminishing presence of cryptojacking. It's never going to go away. It'll sort of fade into the past. It doesn't make the money that it once did. So they're just there. The world has moved to things like the ransomware in order to attempt to get into people's systems and extort money. So anyway, sort of a podcast all about web browsers this week, just as a consequence of how much browser stuff is in the news. And of course, we know that it makes sense for us to talk about that because that is the surface that we visit the internet via. It is the attack surface that we expose. So we've got to keep our browsers secure.
It's better than spending every week talking about Adobe Reader. So that's
yeah. There has been some drift, hasn't there?
There's been a little drift.
And you're listening to Northwest Tech Show on KMUZ. I'm Dave Duncan, joined today by Nate Darnell. How you doing, sir?
Hey, good.
All right, and that was a piece from twit.tv. That was Security Now 713, talking about the cryptojacking devolution ever since Coinbase kind of shut down their doors.
So what are your thoughts at this point about cryptocurrency? Are you still invested in it? Were you ever invested in it? Do you foresee being invested in it?
Well, as I think you know, Nate, I decided to assassinate cryptocurrency by investing in it.
Well, historically, every time you wanted to dabble in it, it took a nosedive.
Yeah. So I sent some money off to Mt. Gox, which was the biggest exchange in Bitcoin, which then promptly imploded. So
right.
Kind of a parallel story that was running recently was the credential stuffing story about how there is enough of an economy for stolen credentials and ways to, put them on the market and get anonymous currency for them, etc. That it started to be practical to do some stuff that wasn't worthwhile doing before. And so here we had this cryptojacking for a while, and it was kind of a silly attack, really, because anyone who's been looking at cryptocurrencies at all in the last few years knows that it was majorly distorted when everyone decided that, to use graphic cards on computers to start processing at a rate that just dwarfed what the main processor could do alone. So when you start talking about, I'm running a bit miner in JavaScript in my web browser or on my 4 megahertz processor in my router, it's just like no, that's that's not going to accomplish much compared to all the other low-hanging fruit out there.
Right. So my understanding more recently from a side conversation was that governments were cracking down on cryptocurrency.
It has all the good features and the bad features you'd expect of currency that is unregulated, especially one that, the average person feels like, oh, I got to go speculate on that.
Right. So I think the bigger issue was that it's a known fact that you can neither escape death nor taxes.
We have very prominent examples that escaping taxes is no big deal. If you've got money, you don't need to pay money. We have, several major corporations whose tax bill is zero. So that's not quite the way it works.
Well, we do have a recent, public debate about the cost of college tuition, too.
Yeah.
And trying to evade that.
And the value of it.
Yeah.
Like there was a video of, why universities are terrified right now. And
Oh, why? Why are they terrified?
Well, because
They're becoming antiquated?
The value of a degree, not only was it, people paying much more for it than it was worth, but now its actual value is falling. Several major corporations now no longer require a degree.
Like Apple.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So
No,
you throw out some big names and they're like, hey, we just care if you're good. We don't care if you win. And what the point they were making is that the technology is changing, especially in technological jobs. The technology is changing so quickly that by the time that the universities have approved and implemented a curriculum for that particular thing, it's already over.
That's correct.
So who's training people? Well, it's the companies. They're just doing it themselves. And so they say, we don't need that degree. We will train you.
That's correct.
And it started a while ago with, McDonald's University. I mean, it's like, yeah, we just, let's, company, a company that's large enough, they simply say the best way to train employees is for us to do it ourselves.
And in my opinion, if somebody wants to go into computer science, you're going to go into one of two different areas. And one is innovation, and one is information management, maintenance, and preservation. And so, for example, the bigger issue right now with technology that changes so frequently is how do you preserve and maintain historical digital artifacts? And how do you organize them so they can be easily found and categorized? It's almost like being a digital librarian.
Yeah.
And there is a whole training process that goes into that doesn't change very often. Yes, the newer technology may come into play, but your job now is to take those old standards and to find a way to move those standards forward onto the new platforms so the standards themselves stay intact.
Oh, yeah.
The innovation side, there really are no standards. It is the Wild West. And
Yeah.
and it's do whatever you can to get the intellectual property and the patents and then figure out how to apply it to modern life.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And all of that, though, on the innovation side is moving so rapidly that by the time you graduate with your computer science degree, everything that you learned is basically an old school standard. It's not the innovative stuff.
Well, one of the big hot fields right now is in machine learning. And even that, a lot of the things that people are doing in machine learning in terms of implementing it for specific cases, that itself is starting to be automated. So, it's going to get so where people can have a turnkey data analysis engine and, be able to train their own people for that too. But what you're speaking to what you're just saying about standards going away and needing to be constantly updated. I just went through the experience of, digging out some 10-year-old hard drives and copying them, back when 1 terabyte was a big hard drive, and copying it to, my newest 8 terabyte drive just to have an online backup.
Right.
And I see these old files and I try to open some of them and they won't open.
Right. Well, and there's another concern here too, and that is simply that the newer technologies, despite the fact that they're faster and they have higher memory capacity, are not generally as reliable as the old school stuff. So, for example, there are a lot of legacy companies that still use tape because tape,
like magnetic reel-to-reel tape.
Exactly. Magnetic, because it stays for a long period of time,
Yep.
and there is a formal process with multiple tools available to recover data from that tape if necessary. Even if it got run over by a tractor trailer, you could still get data back from it.
Joe, look up the tractor trailer truck run over scenario. It's like, oh yeah, we got that one.
And same thing with the old school hard drives. With the standard formatting processes like FAT, FAT32, NTFS, HPFS, and all of those. And then you end up with some of the newer file formats like ZFS, which has the capacity to infinitely scale.
That one's been in the works for a long time, by the way.
Right.
Yeah.
And does have very unique features associated with it, but doesn't have a formalized tool set for getting data back if it fails horribly or if a bad memory module causes the entire thing to be corrupted based on the math.
Right. Some variations of it are very sensitive to that.
Yeah,
the high performance stuff. Yeah.
You have to run ECC memory. And if it throws one
error
bit,
correction memory, so that those stray gamma rays from the other end of the universe don't cause a bit to flip in your whole table.
And then from that point forward, everything becomes unaligned.
Yeah.
Yep. It's a mess. So
it's scary out there. I try to have like 2 copies of everything at any given point.
Well,
I think it's important.
As a corollary, it's everybody's focused on electronic fuel injection right now. Right?
In cars, all right.
And even the new hybrid systems. And as a consequence of that, all of these old timers are dying that knew how to work with mechanical fuel injection pumps and the carburetors. And yet, there is a whole industry around preserving some of these old cars because individuals that are knowledgeable don't want to deal with the newer cars, which are they depreciate very rapidly. They're so heinously complex that most people can't troubleshoot them anyway. And what's that little slick on the ground there? Oh, it's just a little depreciation. Even if they keep the car, the manufacturer is going to stop making a critical electronic part for it, forcing it to be sidelined and or recycled.
Some people have been like having to 3D print their own obsolete parts.
Exactly. So that being said, there is a niche market for maintaining some of these older cars, but the brain trust for keeping some of these old mechanical systems running is being lost, except for a small handful of people, younger people, who are willing to take it on, and they're paid very well. It's like, for example, when you have a 1966 Porsche that runs a very specialized mechanical fuel injection pump, the car is valued at over $150,000 on the open market.
And the owner of that is not living on minimum wage or Social Security.
No, and that person will pay you well.
Yeah, they have money
to keep that mechanical injection pump tuned and working correctly. And mind you, it needs to be recalibrated, every 30,000 miles or so. So that's a recurring revenue stream.
Thank you, old tech.
Yeah.
Yeah, they should be like old tech university, right? It's like all it does is school you on these obsolete technologies.
like people don't know how to attach wood. Like there was an art, to cutting wood so it fit correctly together when you hammered it.
Oh, okay.
And there's a whole, there's a whole school of thought around how to build,
so to speak.
Yes, and
there's probably a YouTube video on it.
A lot of these fundamental skill sets are being lost because of groups like IKEA, which just make like screw together particle board furniture, which people have just grown up on, kind of like junk food. So, I mean, there is a notable market, and this goes back to the IT thing. You try to figure out what tribe you're going to be in. Are you going to be on the bleeding edge tribe, where you're just pushing this innovation further and further and further and faster and faster and faster? Or are you going to have a more predictable, I'm more of a digital historian, my job isn't quite as crazy. I get paid, quite a bit of money, but to do a similar thing every single day, so I have time to go hiking, and I can actually enjoy a family, and
that sounds good. Which option is that?
Yeah, that's the archivalist version, which is you're knowledgeable about the new technology, but you also have one foot in the old technology, which is where you do most of your work, which is retaining the company files, making sure that they're accessible, like for the law firm, and then when the new technology comes into play, making sure that you figure out a way to keep the old standards while moving things to the newer stuff, and then properly archiving the old stuff, so if those old legal files have to be accessed, they can be.
I was just watching this observing this pictorial history of this one engineer who was the only guy who knew how to do a lot of the stuff. I mean, he was not only skilled, but he also had some unique knowledge of how the systems worked. And they could not get through more than a couple of days without someone going to him and asking him about, X, Y, or Z. Well, there was a payroll mishap, and he didn't get his paycheck, and he was a little bit cross. And this normally helpful person, he just put a sign on his desk saying, no pay, no play. And he had the CEO, down there begging him to get on with it. It's like, I can't do anything about it. Please, help us out. And he just keep pointing at the sign. And so the CEO, grabbed some money out of his own personal bank account and, forwarded him a month's pay.
Wow.
Because it was like, and apologized to him, right? Now that's the sort of employee leverage you don't see very much today. It's like, my job is stacking up big bucks in my account, and your job is to do whatever I tell you to do, and do it with a smile, or I will fire you.
Yeah, but see, the point being is that you never want the organization to end up with that kind of toxicity.
No.
I mean, that was clearly mismanagement at some, leadership level.
Well, at a couple of levels. I mean, I have no problems. Like, of course, advance the guys some money if that's why people are there. That's the contract, is you pay them and they give you service. Now, of course, that was very insubordinate attitude, and he, worst case is he should have had some blue flu for a couple of days.
I mean, exactly. I mean, what I would argue is this: is that was either there were repeated issues behind the scenes that finally culminated in that black and white approach. Because I honestly, like what you just shared is an approach that I do not condone. Like there are lots of IT people that try to superimpose power and control over organizations.
I'll tell you what it used to be called: the wizards, right? There you had the wizards who understood the tech, and everyone didn't know anything about it.
Right.
And they pretty much did whatever they wanted to do.
And they would actively prohibit people from learning or understanding about it so they could maintain control over the system.
In some cases, like there was the network manager in San Francisco who refused to turn over. Basically, they wanted to, have a bunch of guys just start dinking with it that were clearly unskilled at the stuff. But, hey, it's their networks, do whatever they want. That was not his attitude. It was like, no, I'm not going to give the passwords to people who, don't know even the most basic thing about how the system works. They're going to screw it up, and or they're going to have a lot of security holes, which I think under the circumstances was absolutely true, just wasn't his problem. He went to jail. He would not give up the, the keys to that thing. So, that was, and I knew one of the first computer crime prosecutions in Oregon was, just somebody who was trying to do the right thing for the company he was working for, but he was overstepping bounds. And he went and did security testing on machines that were being run by people that were far less competent, and there were lots of problems there. But somebody saw, this crack process running and just lost their minds. And the next thing they're, like searching his house to make sure he's not stealing their intellectual property, which he wasn't. And, they gave him a lot of heck. It cost him, almost $1 million to do his legal defense stuff. And he eventually got, he didn't have to go to jail, and he got, his record expunged and all this stuff, because it really was a mountain out of a molehill. But it came from this old time feeling of, hey, let the wizards, let the grown-ups handle the machines. And usually, a lot of our technical brotherhood, especially back then, were very socially inept, we would say. So, they did not know how to properly communicate their concerns in a way that was credible. And so that was a problem. It's like, I'm telling you, you're gonna sink the ship if you, start cutting a hole in that particular wall. And they just weren't saying it in a way that people could understand. And so they just want to push ahead and do the wrong thing. It's like, okay, well, their dime. So, I mean, that's changed a lot in the intervening years. You see chief technical officers all across a lot of companies, not just the big tech firms, because they understand that the technology is a big part of their business, especially when they're trying to fire all their employees. Right. And they need to have someone who understands it in those meetings where they're making the big decisions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, whenever I'm working with an organization, I'm always adamant that one person cannot hold the keys. you treat it like a nuclear weapon scenario.
Yeah,
I'm not joking.
Yeah, you got to have two key systems.
Or three.
Yeah.
You actually have to have the president, the vice president, and either the chief technology officer or the person in charge of the technology holds
Thank
a key.
goodness, one grown up.
Yes, and that allows the VP or the president, if necessary, to remove the IT person and to hire someone new if necessary, or to appoint someone else in the chain who already has existing knowledge of the systems but may be a subordinate. Yeah, and promote them. And at the end of the day, I think people have to be grown up about the fact that sometimes cultures change, and your position in that organization just may not be the position that it was, and it's time for you to move on and to find a different tribe. To hold an organization hostage is immature, inappropriate, and generally more damaging than it is solution creating.
Right. Being immature is the CEO's job, so leave it to him. Right. It's really just the same behavior, except when it's coming from an underling. It's so distressing.
But I mean, in defense of CEOs, here's what I would say. That in the age of information technology and fake news and celebrity news and all of these things, it seems to be only the CEOs that do bad things that get the spotlight. There are lots of CEOs that do really good work and spend a lot of time ensuring that.
Yeah, dude, it's like not all police officers shoot unarmed people in the back.
Most police officers do not shoot unarmed people in the back.
Yeah.
There, you have a small handful of bad apples that.
It's like, what's the number that you're shooting for, though, so to speak? Zero.
You have bad apples in every single academic institution. You have bad apples in every single religion. You have bad apples on every single police force. You have bad apples in almost every area of life. But the vast majority of people are genuinely good.
Yes. Well, including your line wizards. They're not. They're general. I think more often than most other people, because they tend to be kind of obsessed with the truth and doing things the right way. When they go off the reservation, it's usually not to enrich themselves.
Yeah.
It's not to do something bad. It's just like really the main consequence is that they made their CEO feel bad that they weren't in absolute control of everything.
The biggest issue that the wizards have, more often than not,
which, by the way, are gone. I mean, they're pretty much gone now. But
while they have technical competence, they tend to be lacking in emotional intelligence.
Yes, that's
and
true.
As a consequence of this, when it comes to agreeing to disagree or finding soft solutions for political issues, because at the end of the day, when you're a CEO, you're not just dealing with technical things. You're dealing with personality types.
Oh, yeah.
You're dealing with groups of people, some of whom work great alone, some of whom are antagonistic towards one another.
Some should be alone whether they like it or not.
and there's a lot of emotional dynamics that are happening, and that requires somebody who really is not only intelligent but also emotionally intelligent, and that's a whole different level of understanding than what you're typically dealing with in a black and white binary computer room.
Yes.
Right.
But by the way, that's a good heads up to. It's not only important for the CEOs to kind of figure out a little bit more about how the technology works and the basics of security of what's going on, but it also behooves the techs to really study how to interact with other people.
That's correct.
As assiduously as they do their networking and their computer cards.
That's why my argument has always been you should be an EMT, an emergency medical technician, before you ever become a computer technician. Because you learn
about prioritization.
Well, you are forced to deal with people who are kicking, hitting, screaming, spitting, and seething. You have to interact with them professionally. You have to get them from point A to point B. You have to avoid being stabbed by needles or screwdrivers or any other
very
weapons.
Much like a tech room.
And then exactly, and then and through it all, you have to document things accurately.
Yeah.
And you have to not take things personally, right? And so once you get done with that basic training, wiping the spit off and learning how to document things with paper and pen because the technology never
and
works
not catching
anyway.
anything from your training period there.
Then you might be prepared for actual IT world work in corporate America.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Where you are blamed for everything anyway.
Now this is high level stuff anyway, because your line guys are never going to do this. They're always, it's kind of, in some ways, it's fallen back to, hiring the paper boy, to come work on your website. You know, because it's just like, just get someone young in here who sort of knows something about something. You know, there's a lot of that still going on because it's all about cost cutting. And a lot of times, you know, they're, you know, aged careers don't work out too well in corporate America for the most part. If you don't, you know, make your way into management or something, you just get pushed out the door because, you know, the technology changes. It gets easier to use.
Yeah.
The next bunch of guys come in that they don't know as much, but they don't need to know as much. And it's sort of like, you know, we've talked about with airplane maintenance. A lot of this stuff, when you don't do it right, is invisible for quite a while. And when the consequences do come out, you don't necessarily know what happened. You know, take when they put the, you know, the one of the credit bureaus put a music major in charge of security for their data and looked astonished when they, you know, millions of people's credit histories, you know, went flying out the door. And, you know, there's also an absence of consequence loops for behaving badly and not acting in good faith with the material that you're trusted with and or, you know, self-appointed to own, you know, in today's you know, data-rich surveillance capitalism kind of situation. So yeah, it's like techies learn more humanities. Everyone else learn more tech.
This is why IBM has continued to remain relevant.
Oh, yeah.
Because IBM focused exclusively on creating a leadership pipeline. So they would rapidly assess those technicians that were in the lower rungs and those engineers that were in the lower rungs. And they would say, which one actually has leadership potential? Which one actually is a team leader? Which one actually has good communication skills?
So you mean they actually had good leadership at IBM because of this?
That's what they focused on.
Yeah.
And so that's not to say that they haven't made poor decisions or bad decisions, but generally speaking, if you have...
But on whatever decision they make, they execute it well.
That's the goal. And, you know, but this is the goal with any CEO, and this is the challenge, is that as a CEO, you are responsible for all the successes and all the failures. And if you make no decision, nothing ever happens.
Yeah.
So you have to make the best decision based on the facts you're given at the time, then go down that path until other facts are presented.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and sometimes it works out great, sometimes it doesn't. But the point being is that your tenure will be limited. There's only so far that you can serve before you have to pass the baton to someone else. And if you don't start building a leadership pipeline to have other eligible CEOs coming in behind you, then you're going to be without a talent pool, you know, to keep driving that organization. And this is where a lot of organizations fall down. And it's not just enough to be technically inclined. You have to be politically inclined. You have to be emotionally inclined. You have
It's
to have
a continual struggle.
You have to have this high bandwidth.
And just like tech, you need to continually be honing your skills.
And this is why, like when you go work at a place like Nike, you're either moving up or you're moving out. There's no staying there. No, I'm serious.
Interesting.
Yeah. So on the tech side, when you work with a company like Nike, you see this aggressive movement cycle where they have young people coming into their retail ranks, and they have to rank advance fast. Otherwise, if they're not moving aggressively like team training, then they are off the team. That is it. They have to move X number of garments within X number of hours. You know, and every person that comes in that retail door has to leave with this, or this.
Well, and keep in mind, though, a lot of this is burning up people as fuel for the company.
Oh, I have no doubt about that. I'm just telling you.
So I don't recommend this. This is not the ideal balance. You know, I think one of the best routes you can go is find people with the complementary skill sets and, you know, form your own business.
So what's Jack Mao's work ethic? I think it was the 996. I think
996.
That's 9 a.m. to 9 p.m.
which is 12 hours.
6 days a week.
6 days a week. So yeah, same thing, but better said. Yes.
Yes, and then you spend time with your wife and your children on one day.
Yeah, or don't have them.
Yes.
Just let them go. Okay. Let's skip off that because I did have one more thing I wanted to get in.
Okay.
We're closing in on the top of the hour. So let's go to a Creative Commons clip from twit.tv. This is from Tech News Weekly 82, talking about a form of automatic Twitter shadow ban.
This is Twit.
So I woke up one morning and checked my notifications on my phone. It said, "You've received a direct message on Twitter from Satan." I thought, you know, that's a little weirder than the notifications I wake up to most mornings, but not that much weirder. I figured it was spam or something. Turns out it was a real person. It's the Satan parody account on Twitter. He has close to 1 million followers, and he was having some trouble with his Twitter account. He wanted to know if I could help him in any way.
So his problem was that he was losing followers. So Satan wanted your help
to get more followers, essentially. And you said,
when you put it that way.
yeah. So at first you were kind of like, that's not what I do. I'm a tech reporter. I report on people's problems. I don't fix them. But then you decided to help anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I actually got intrigued by what was going on, because it seemed like he was being affected by something I wrote about a year ago. And it's one of Twitter's more misunderstood safety and security features. This is a feature where they use automated software to hide certain accounts in the replies to a tweet, and also to hide them in search results. So basically your account is getting downgraded. It's not being shown in public views. You can still tweet, all your followers can still see your tweets, but you're just not going to really earn any new followers that way. You're not going to be able to contribute to the public conversation. The thinking behind this is a way that Twitter can kind of keep trolls out of sight without having to actually manually go in and catch them breaking some rule explicitly. It can just look at accounts where their behavior or other people's interactions with them suggest that they are spammy, or that they are off topic or rude or vulgar or whatever. And then, without having to have any human review it, their software can just make those accounts less visible to everybody. And it looked like that's what was happening to Satan. And I was curious to figure out why.
So from what I understand from your piece, Satan was getting a lot of followers from his relationship with Donald Trump, correct? Like he would respond to Trump's tweets, as many people do, and then people would see that and think it was hilarious and then follow him. And maybe that's where people were no longer seeing his tweets?
That's one place they were no longer seeing his tweets. So yeah, in the past he had done several replies to Donald Trump tweets that ended up being one of the top replies, which means that they get seen by millions of people. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of fans of Donald Trump, particularly Christian fans of Donald Trump, reported that or otherwise flagged his tweets, and maybe that was part of what happened here. But also, if you searched for Satan on Twitter, if you typed Satan into the search bar, his account wouldn't come up anymore. It used to be the top one, and it wasn't coming up anymore. So again, his followers could still see his stuff, but he was unable to keep growing his Satan brand.
And so Twitter made this change. Maybe if you were a tech reporter like you knew that they were making this change, but no one who was affected by this change was notified at all. Unlike in the past, when sometimes, there's other ways in which you'll get alerts saying like you've been, put in timeout on Twitter for whatever reason. But for this, people had no idea, right?
That's right. So if you get suspended by Twitter, they will let you know. And they now, at least, will tell you what you did wrong or what rule you're presumed to have violated. And then you can kind of get in touch with them and try to get reinstated. Sometimes they'll give you a specific action you can take. Like if you delete these 3 tweets, then your account can be reinstated. But yeah, that's not what they're doing here. They're doing something that is more on a mass scale. It's entirely automated. And they're kind of trying to thread a needle here, right? They want to be able to affect accounts or downgrade accounts that they suspect people don't like seeing without having to go through the full enforcement process. And they decided at the beginning that they weren't going to tell people when this happened to their accounts. The people didn't necessarily have a right to know because, again, they were still tweeting. They just weren't as visible anymore. Twitter considers that part of its algorithm that shows people the most interesting tweets, the most relevant tweets, rather than considering it like an enforcement action or an action that deprives someone of the right to speak on Twitter. It just makes them less likely to be heard. Now, that has lent itself to misinterpretation, as I sort of predicted when they rolled this out. Conservatives early on, some conservative leaders and even some Republicans in Congress found that they were getting caught up by this feature and that their tweets were not showing up. Actually, it was that they weren't showing up in search results anymore. Twitter said that was a mistake and a bug, and they fixed it, but not before conservatives had decided that this was a shadow ban and that it was biased against conservatives. And since then, there have been congressional hearings. Apparently, it was a topic when Donald Trump met with Jack Dorsey. So they've made a lot of enemies with this feature that's come to be known as a shadow ban, even though it isn't quite technically a shadow ban as we've previously known it.
I mean, and you can understand, well, if there's true trolls that are doing something, we wouldn't, Twitter would not benefit by saying, like, you're doing this very specific thing, and that's why we're stopping you, because they might find a way around of it, I guess, or they might just stop being trolls, although they probably wouldn't. But it's the idea that you don't know, and for a person like Satan, who is making his living, trying to make a living off Twitter, would link to a store where he was sold merch, and then just for this to disappear and to have no reason, to no understanding why. I mean, it can drive up these kinds of. You can see why algorithms drive people crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it just feels like he has no control over it. And not only that, but he tried to tweet at Twitter. He tweeted at Jack. He tweeted at Del Harvey, who's their VP of Trust and Safety. He tweeted at Support, which is their customer support account. He tweeted at the ads account. He did everything he could to think of to get in touch with somebody at Twitter to figure out why this was happening and how he could fix it. Nobody got back to him. And still, even since my story, he says that nobody has gotten back to him or reached out to him. So, yeah, your account is getting affected by Twitter's algorithm, and there's no, you're not given a heads up. There's no recourse. There's literally nothing you can do about it. And so it does understandably make somebody feel helpless, and even made me feel a little bit of sympathy for the devil in this case.
And so Twitter did respond to you in one way, and Satan had not always owned this account, or owned it and sold it and bought it back, or there was some transferring of accounts, and Twitter said maybe that has to do with why he was being muted or something.
Yeah, and that gets at one of the troubles with transparency on Twitter and other social platforms, is that the platforms don't like to talk publicly about an individual account. And that's partly for privacy reasons, or reasons of sort of a power disparity between the company and any individual user. But they kind of hinted to me, without saying as much, that maybe it was because some other account, they had managed to link to this account that as being owned by the same person, and that one had gotten in trouble somehow or run afoul of Twitter's rules. And so the Satan account was being affected as well. But that wasn't sort of a definitive answer. They still haven't told Satan himself, who's, by the way, a 26-year-old British lad who works in a shop. That's the person behind the Satan account. So they didn't tell him about it, and that was just sort of the best hint I could get from them as to why this might be the case. He did admit that he had gotten that account from somebody else years ago. He thinks it would be a little strange if something that happened 6 or 8 years ago was just affecting his account now, but that's a possibility. And again, I'm not going to rule out the possibility that Satan didn't do something very wrong that we just don't know about, or that I don't know about, but Twitter couldn't point me to anything in particular that he had done wrong or that violated its rules.
And so at the heart of this story is this kind of idea, when you're talking about conservatives saying there's the shadow bans and this idea of free speech that we hear all the time. But one thing that you talk about in your article is free speech versus free reach. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so this program by Twitter, I mean, I'm giving it a hard time here because I think there are flaws with it, but there's also a really understandable rationale behind it, I think. So an idea that has sort of gained currency among critics of social platforms recently is this idea of free speech, but not free reach. Renee DiResta, who's testified before Congress on this kind of stuff, is one of the people who's championed this idea. And the thought is, look, all right, you have people who are saying hateful stuff or bigoted stuff or potentially dangerous stuff on social platforms that a lot of people don't want to see. At the same time, you don't necessarily want to be in the business of denying people the right to speak unless you really, unless it's really egregious or unless there's a clear rules violation. So what if there are ways that these social platforms can make sure their algorithms aren't amplifying these people, right? Like, still give them the chance to speak, still give them the chance to reach the people who have chosen to follow them, but make sure that your algorithm doesn't broadcast them to people who don't want that type of stuff in their feeds. You could see this being applied to someone like Alex Jones. You could see it being applied to all sorts of folks who may indeed have the right to speak, but who a lot of people just don't want to hear, and a lot of what they say might be really offensive to people who aren't already in their camp or haven't chosen to seek that out.
So just to be clear, if someone has a problem with Twitter, they should contact you first, right? And did you want to give your phone number?
Thank you for that opportunity, Megan.
So no, you are just a writer, a senior writer at 10 for Medium. You're writing about people's problems, only occasionally solving them or trying to solve them. But
I did not solve Satan's problems.
Yeah.
But I'll update you if anything changes. I told him to get in touch if he ever finds himself reinstated somehow, or if he ever hears from Twitter, but he still hasn't so far.
And you're listening to Northwest Tech Show on KMUZ. That was a Creative Commons clip from twit.tv. That was Tech News Weekly 82. I'm Dave Duncan. I'm joined by Nate Darnell. And yeah, so we've kind of touched on this before. I think one of the things that was really kind of vital out there, there's a couple of things is, okay, we've got algorithmic judgment of people and, changing their lives. There's trying to make money building on someone else's platform. In this case, someone had a parody account. They were running it on Twitter and, making money off a merchandise store or something. And they fell afoul of Twitter's algorithms because they went into, a debate with someone who had very rabid fans, potentially. That's one theory, is is that they, all sort of said, oh, this is junk, this is junk, this is junk, or something like that. And Twitter algorithms just, automatically banned him based on, that signal, which was meant to say, this person is doing something wrong, as opposed to, I don't politically agree with this, this person's making fun of someone I like, and I don't have a sense of humor about it. So, boom, you lose your platform. And free speech and First Amendment and all that says that the government cannot use its, frankly, mighty powers to preemptively prevent you from speaking. Doesn't apply to a forum created by a private company. On the other hand, they are taking advantage and profiting from the expectation that this is a public space that happens to be on their property, so that they can tap it and make money from it. And so they do have some obligations, I think, in expectations, if not legally, and possibly legally too. So, you make money under one premise and then change the rules, that tends to have consequences down the road. So I don't know. Have you any thoughts on shadow banning people, or doing things where you limit their visibility without telling them?
I think without telling them, this is so complicated, Duncan, because there are people that say things that are genuinely hurtful, divisive, and what's the term? Not flame throwing, gaslighting.
Gaslighting, yeah,
right.
Or you're pretending like you don't understand what they're saying.
I have mixed feelings. Like most recently, Facebook banned some people that were really controversial and negative,
and promoting false information that was leading to people potentially getting hurt.
Right.
And so there's a public safety aspect to things.
I guess though, like on the flip side, Facebook is technically it's not a government entity. It is a private,
but
that has rules
that has a outsized influence on society.
That's true, and I think what that requires is I think there is accuracy in the argument that Facebook has become monopolistic and therefore does require some degree of federal regulation.
Yeah, they have bought potential competitors and prevented anyone else from rising up in the space.
So if it is to be deemed, which I think we're quickly approaching that point, that it should be deemed a utility, social utility, if you will. We've got water utilities,
or simply an abuse of monopoly powers.
Right.
Because there was a precedent on the book for a long time. I think it came in kind of the Reagan era, where they decided that the mark of a abusive monopoly was strictly related to, did it increase the price of something in the marketplace?
Yeah.
So since they're giving it away for free, we can't be a monopoly, but they can be a monopsony, which means the only buyer of stuff, like Amazon has been accused of being. So there's a lot of these, and then we have presidential candidates that are running on let's break up big tech.
Right. So I think the shadow blocking is done to avoid public debate.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so.
Yeah, we're going to block you and not tell you, so you don't. You're just like, you don't need that. And that is very much like gaslighting, right? It's like, why am I not getting any followers? And that is actually a form of fraud, I would think, because you're making an effort, you're putting in time and effort to do something, and someone else has rendered your business model irrelevant.
So I do take umbrage with the lack of free speech, or the prohibition against free speech, because I think that's a fundamental tenet. You're not permitted to physically hurt somebody, and arguably if you're saying things that are intentionally like menacing, then that falls under the purview of police action. But there are rules and regulations in place to allow you to picket, to be able to share your feelings and your expressions, which I think are necessary for a democratic process.
Yeah, and if they can render those invisible because they control the communication space.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And so therefore you are taking that process away, and you are essentially socially engineering an outcome in your favor. And the lack of a willingness to come to a center stage and to have that debate with somebody. Now, where this becomes murky is if the companies are privately owned
Yep.
or held by stockholders, even if they do have social influence, there are rules and conduct that's expected for participation on those forums or on those websites.
Sure.
And so
Terms of service completely determined by the owners of the site.
right, and they do legally have the right. If you
Currently,
if you
yes.
admit that you're willing to accept these terms, then they have the right to address any infringements based on their perception.
Yeah.
Now you can always go to court and spend the next 10 years in court arguing your point if you have the financial resources to do it.
Well, I think what we have here, though, is the big players punching down at people individually and causing massive problems for them. So since these mediums are what we communicate with people and what we are, a lot of times how our work is tied to, I think there should be almost like you can't, it's not okay to put out defective cars and stuff or seats, like a seat that if you every 100th time you sit in it, it'll, like impale you or something. There are product liability laws. And I think really if you apply product liability to running a social media space in a way that is harmful or misleading to people, I think there's a case to be made there. So I think we're kind of coming possibly to the beginning of the end of the Old West, where there's no rules and people can just run fast and break things, and that's not a problem. So we'll see how that pans out. But with great power should come some responsibility. I don't know, just a little bit.
I think there's another layer to this, which if you hark back to I think it was one of the Bourne Ultimatum movies, where there was kind of an example of this like young tech entrepreneur that had this like social media or data mining site. There was a government entity that was brokering a deal with the tech entrepreneur, basically saying, look, if you're going to do this, this is what we're going to request on the other side, and that's that we have access to these files, we can peruse these systems. And so there's another layer of influence in all of this, which is generally not ever outed in the public, and this is what is most disconcerting to me. It's one thing to say, yeah, like, you've got your sociopathic personalities like Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, and Mark Zuckerberg, no matter how much they might want to hide behind
AKA
Kermit the Frog
successful
voices.
businessman, yeah.
Right. The reality is that above and beyond them is also another level of government, which is based on, global regime change and politics and big oil and big pharmaceutical. And they're looking for ways to maintain the same entrenched grapple hole on society that they've had for over 100 years.
Yeah, it's same old story. Pull the ladder up. I've got mine. I'm pulling the ladder up.
And that they have to review these technological disruptions and ways that members of society can exchange information based on the way that they want society to adapt and to change, but may not be beneficial to these other larger industries.
Yeah, there should be a public option. Maybe that's we should have some public. We should have some public networks.
Well,
it's like, wow, people need function X, Y, and Z. The companies are taking advantage of the fact they have a monopoly on offering it. Let's give everyone a free account.
And so that may very well be an option, but this is the direction that I'm going, which is, otherwise you end up with the government getting intrusive in these clandestinely intrusive in these other groups.
You've collected wonderful information. Thank you so much for giving it to us.
And let's not be naive about this. In decades past, there have been active efforts to prevent people from voting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Now,
ongoing.
How do you now involve yourself if you are one of those bad actors or bad apples and you want to affect an outcome? How do you now involve yourself in these new systems or involve your agenda to either sway opinion or get people to vote in a specific way? Right. This is where it gets really frightening. And so I think this is where this shadow government, if you will, still employs influence, and that's disconcerting to me. Really concerning.
Yeah.
And so that's why I just don't do social media much anymore.
It's that's I think that's a good note to end on. I'm seeing a lot more people that are just saying, you know what, dude, I'm out.
It's too stressful, man.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that on Mommy Bloggers on the next show.
Excellent. And with that, you've done it again. Spent an hour talking about technology. and how better understanding of it can help lead to better outcomes at home, at work, and in your civic engagements. I hope you'll join us to continue this conversation next Wednesday and every Wednesday, noon to 1 o'clock on Northwest Tech Show.